Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we audio and video record our meetings. So to the board members, I ask that when you have something to say on the record, you kindly push your little microphone button. It turns red, you'll be on the record, and when you're finished, please hit the button to disconnect, as we only can have 5 live mics at a time. So with that, I will turn it over to Chairman Melvin of the Finance Committee.
Good morning. We're going to begin the meeting of the Finance Committee of the Regional Transportation Authority. Sorry for the late start, but let's get right into it. Can we start with a roll call, please?
Certainly. Director Colson? Director Groven?
Here.
Director Holt? Here. Director Kotel? Here. Director Lewis?
Here.
Director Ross? Dr. Sager?
Here.
Director Troiani?
Here.
Director Melvin?
Here.
We have a quorum of 8 present with 1 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Andalcio, Carey, Fraga, Fuentes, Higgins, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Now we would have the approval of the minutes from the meeting held on August 22nd. Are there any questions or comments from anyone? Is there a motion? Director Higgins moves. Oh, that's right. Triani moves. And second from Director Holt. Can we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Director Colson? Yes. Director Groven?
Yes.
Director Holt?
Yes.
Director Kotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Dr. Sager?
Yes.
Director Troiani?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Aye.
8 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Next is the report on the monthly financial results. B.
Mr. Chairman, presenting today will be Eva De Laurentiis, our project manager and budget analyst. Eva?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Today I'm presenting the year-to-date financial results through July. Ridership and operating revenue are both still unfavorable to budget, but expense performance continues to be very good. The regional recovery ratio finished the month 0.5 points favorable to budget at 50.4%. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. System ridership in July was 0.3% lower than prior year and 1.3% lower than budget. Year-to-date ridership is now down 3.1% from 2018. Ridership has been down from prior year in each month, but continues to narrow the gap to the dash budget line, which unfortunately is not on the screen. On the summary table, each service board continues to record unfavorable ridership results year to date. Pace's shortfall exceeded 3%, highlighted in red, with all 3 modes, fixed route, dial ride, and van pool, down about 7% from 2018. In total, the system is 7.1 million rides unfavorable to budget. Operating revenue was 11.8% or 11.8 million or 1.7% unfavorable to budget. More than 70% of this shortfall can be attributed to the lower level of reduced fare reimbursement from the state. As we've reported each month, revenue results also started the year in a hole after the severe winter weather in the first quarter. Pace operating revenue is 5.2% unfavorable to budget, highlighted in red due to lower than budgeted fare revenue and the cuts to the reduced fare subsidy. The public funding section of the dashboard shows that the results are 2.7% below budget through July due to unfavorable sales tax, PTF, and RET results. Sales tax through May was 1.2% below budget, but 1.2% higher than prior year. CTA's public funding was $19.7 million, or 4.3% unfavorable to budget, highlighted in red due to sales tax results underperforming and weak real estate transfer results. I wonder if I can. Let me see. System-wide operating expenses through July were 41 million, or 2.5% unfavorable. 2.5% favorable to budget, with all three service boards and ADA Paratransit reporting favorable results. Each of the service boards benefited from lower than budgeted diesel fuel prices. Metro's results were 3.4% favorable to budget, highlighted in light blue, due to favorability in administration, operations, maintenance, and fuel. PACE's results were 4.8% favorable to budget, also highlighted in light blue, due to favorability in all categories except overhead. At the regional level, favorable expenses offset the unfavorable revenue and public funding, producing a net result which was 5.4 million favorable to budget, an improvement of 5.7 million from last month's result. PACE and ADA Paratransit recorded net results favorable by more than 3%, driven by strong expense performance. Through July, the regional recovery ratio of 50.4% is favorable to budget by 0.5 percentage points and has risen above the 50% statutory requirement for the first time this year. The fair recovery ratio of 35.8% and the all revenue recovery ratio of 42.2% were both lower than prior year, reflecting the weather-related impact on ridership and fare revenue. CTA and PACE both reported a slightly unfavorable to budget result, driven by unfavorable fare revenue and reduced fare funding. Metra and ADA Paratransit reported favorable results due to good expense performance. In summary, the service board's expense performance through July continues to be strong, helping to offset the effects of ridership and revenue shortfalls. The regional recovery ratio surpassed the statutorily required 50% level 1 month ahead of the budgeted timeline. This concludes my remarks. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Be happy to answer any questions.
It's okay, thank you for your report. Any comments, questions, thoughts, anyone? Very good, thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to move on here to our action items. 4A, the ordinance authorizing the quarterly amendment to the 2019 to 2023 capital program and the Innovation Coordination Enhancement, ICE funded projects.
Good morning. I'm going to turn this over to Tatiana Jane, our Manager of Capital Programs, to cover this item. And just to note that there's no slideshow for this.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Melvin, members of the Finance Committee and Board. We are here to request approval of two ordinances. First, an amendment of the 2019-2023 capital program incorporating changes in program revenues and expenses for CTA, Metra, and PACE. And second, a time extension for implementation of CTA, Metra, and PACE's innovation, coordination, and enhancement of ICE-funded projects. Let me walk you through the ordinance and changes we're recommending first. This quarter, we are asking you to approve a total net funding decrease to the 5-year capital program of $33,030,000 that affects the current year. This net decrease includes $46.8 million reduction in service board bond proceeds, $10,040,000 of additional CMAQ funding, and $3.73 million of RTA and service board funds. So the total increase for CTA is $570,000, for Metra $3.16 million, and for PACE a decrease of $36.76 million. The 570,000 increase for CTA reprograms remaining 2016 ICE funds to the project for implementation of various solutions to address disaster recovery and other information technology requirements. And for Metro, the 3.16 million increase consists of 2.5 million of new funding from the University of Chicago to rehabilitate Metro 5960th Street Station, and 660,000 reprogrammed from previous years unexpended Metro and RTA ICE funds that will be used for hybrid and alternative fuel vehicles. For PACE, the 36.76 million decrease consists of 46.8 million of deobligated PACE bond funds from Northwestern Garage in Wheeling, and these funds will be replaced in the future with the newly available state bond funding. And $10,040,000 of new CMAQ funding for Pulse Dempster line construction. The details of the funding changes are included in capital program schedule 2A and 2B attached to the ordinance. Moving on to the second ordinance, we are requesting your approval of the 12-month extension for 3 CTA, 6 Metro, and 4 PACE projects. RTA staff has reviewed this request and found them to be justified as outlined in the ordinance request memo. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have for both of these ordinance requests.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Yeah, Director Grove.
Thanks. Tatiana, so the 46.8 million for the Northwest
Garage in the building.
garage, it's not that it won't happen, it's just that it'll be funded with state bonds then?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
They'd originally programmed that in advance of the state capital program passing, so it was kind of on their plans, but once the state program passed, they were like, okay, we don't need to tap local dollars, we'll tap state dollars to do that.
They have savings when they do it.
Any other questions, comments? Yeah. Thank you for the report. Yeah. Is there a motion, please? Director Triani, Director Sager, second. We have a vote, please.
Director Colson? Yes. Director Groven?
Yes.
Director Holt?
Yes.
Director Kotel? Aye. Director Lewis?
Yes.
Dr. Sager?
Yes.
Director Triani?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Aye.
8 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to item 4B, the ordinance establishing estimates of amounts available to the service boards for the 2020 through 2022 operating budgets, the required recovery ratios for 2020, and the preliminary 2020 through 2024 capital program funds. B, please.
Good morning, Chairman Melvin and members of the Finance Committee and the Board. Over the past couple of months, we once again utilized a collaborative process to reach agreement on the operating funding amounts you are considering today. And thanks go out to the Service Board CFOs, Jeremy Fine, Tom Farmer, and Dominic Cuomo for their candid input. The discussions for allocating the newly approved state capital program funding were lengthy and spirited. Leanne, Jill, and Jeremy LaMarche led those discussions with the Service Board executives, and our thanks go out to them for achieving what we believe is an equitable and responsible allocation for capital investment across the region. Thanks also to Bill Lackman, our Treasurer and Budget Manager, and Doug Anderson, our Manager of Operating Budgets and Analysis, who pulled the numbers together and will be giving you the details of the operating funding allocations for 2020. They will be followed by Jill Leary, our Senior Deputy Executive Director for Capital and Chief of Staff, who will be presenting the capital funding allocations. Doug?
Get the slides to advance.
The arrow. What is going on? Oh, here. Okay.
Can you escape on the keyboard?
get it to advance.
again. You see that it popped up that little box that said resume slideshow? Can you click on that?
Where is it?
Click on it, says resume slideshow in the middle of the blue slide.
No.
Go up, right there. No, it's an extra pop-up box. Yeah, can you do that? Does that work?
I have no idea what's going on right now either.
Everybody's got the presentation, so maybe we
Right.
just move forward with that.
There's a hard copy
Yeah.
at
Go
your
back
places.
to
We
the
can
front
flip
screen.
along. We'll just say next
I
slide.
tried 3 times. Even Chris was trying this. We don't know what's going on.
Okay, why don't we follow along with the presentation?
Okay, good morning. As B mentioned, this item addresses the proposed operating and capital funding amounts for the 2020 budget and 5-year capital program. Setting the funding amounts is a critical step in the RTA region's annual budget process. And we're on slide 2 here in your packet. The RTA Act establishes September 15th as the date by which the funding amounts for the upcoming year must be adopted. The RTA Act requires the service boards to develop budgets that are consistent with the amounts adopted by the RTA board. All right, slide 3. The first step in setting the funding amounts is establishing a sales tax forecast done in collaboration with the service boards. Economic factors must be examined. Our region's unemployment situation has continued to improve over the past 12 months, with the jobless rate declining to less than 4%, in line with the national unemployment rate. Sales tax performance in 2018 was strong at 4.1% growth, but has slowed to around 1% so far in 2019. Excuse me, let me try to get the slides. That's still not responding. It was impacted by the severe cold in January. Our custom forecast from Moody's and the Chicago Federal Reserve suggests growth of around 3% for 2020. And we're on slide 3. There we go. Tourism continues to be a bright spot, with another record of 57.6 million visitors to Chicago in 2018, a more than 4% increase over 2017's record level. Unfortunately, the state fiscal year 2020 budget continued the 5% PTF reduction of the previous budget, and the 1.5% state surcharge on sales tax collections remains in place. The annual impact of those two actions still amounts to about $40 million less funding for the RTA and service boards. On to slide 4. Our resulting assumption for sales tax growth is shown in this table. After discussions with the service board CFOs, we have assumed 3.1% sales tax growth in 2020, with lower growth of 2% in 21 and 2022, consistent with forecasts for slowing economic activity. After a very strong year of 15% growth in 2018, RET receipts are expected to grow in 2020 at about the same rate as sales tax. Next slide. Now for the numbers. This table shows the resulting amounts of RTA operating funding proposed for each service board. It compares the proposed 2020 funding allocations to the 2019 budgeted levels. As you can see on the right, operating funding for the individual service boards is projected to increase in the 3% to 4% range. ADA paratransit funding growth is projected at 4.8%, as increases in both ridership and contract pricing are anticipated by PACE. Total proposed RTA funding to the service boards of $1.6 billion represents an increase of 3.6% from the 2019 budget. In addition to the statutory funding prescribed by the RTA Act, each service board also receives some non-statutory funding, adhering to the funding framework established back in the 2015 budget year. Next slide, please. This chart shows the percentage of total operating funding, here including RET, to be received by each service boards. CTA 52.4%, Metris 26.0%, PACE Suburban Service 10.7%, and PACE ADA Paratransit 10.9%. These shares are very similar to the way the funding pie appeared for 2019. Next slide, please. As you will recall, the RTA Act requires aggregate operating revenues that equal at least 50% of the aggregate costs of providing public transportation in our region. Service board recovery ratios are proposed to remain unchanged for 2020, with each service board charged with achieving its individual ratio in order to ensure a regional recovery ratio of 50%. The proposed ratios are 54.75% for CTA, 52.5% for Metra, and 30.3% for PACE. The regional ADA paratransit recovery ratio is set at the statutorily required minimum of 10%. Here, I'll turn it over to Jill for a discussion of the capital funding.
Thanks, Doug. Next slide, please. Shifting our view to the capital funding picture, the 2020 capital program includes funding of $1.3 billion, up almost $600 million from 2019, due in large part to the state's new Rebuild Illinois capital program. The federal formula amount is based on levels established by Congress in 2015 with passage of the FAST Act and adjusted based on the actual 2017 and 2018 apportionments. State capital components include $520 million of bond proceeds, part of the planned $2.6 billion in proceeds to the RTA region over the 5-year program, along with $227 million of annual proceeds, or PAYGO as we call it, from the increase in motor fuel tax. I will go into more detail about the state program. Next slide, please. As you know, the RTA and the service boards prepared for a long-awaited capital infusion by adopting the Invest in Transit Strategic Regional Plan for 2018 to 2023. The RTA and the service boards had advocated for the funding to address capital needs of $30 billion for the transit system projected over the next 10 years. Therefore, it's difficult to overstate the potential impact of Rebuild Illinois with the largest infusion of transit funding in our history and our state's first capital program in a decade. It also provides the first ever sustainable PAYGO capital funding for transit, along with some new bonding authority. With the advent of Rebuild Illinois, we've begun to institute a new process based on the strategic plan's 3 primary goals, the accompanying priority projects, the continuance of implementing transit asset management, and building towards a regional consensus in programming these funds for CTA, Metra, and PACE. This new state capital funding will expedite overdue repair and replacement projects, reduce the backlog of deferred improvements, and move the system to a state of good repair. This will help us move forward in the near and the longer term. Next slide, please. Subsequent slides will delve into the dollar amounts in the process, but as a reminder, let's look at the long-range chart created with our modeling tool that we presented last month. I'm happy to go over this in more detail, but the largest point here is to illustrate and remind you of the importance of a stable and sustainable funding source for capital well past our 5-year time frame in order to maintain our current state of good repair. With this in mind and the importance of a regional perspective, we work with the service boards towards achieving funding allocations. Next slide, please. Over the summer, intensive discussions between the RTA and the service boards built on the Invest in Transit goals to identify 5 principles for allocating Rebuild Illinois' annual capital PAYGO funds in the 5-year bonding capital dollars. The principles guiding the programming of these funds are to work towards decreasing the region-wide backlog, focus on completing projects in a timely manner and spending the money, providing funding certainty to the service boards for near-term decisions, working towards not locking things down in perpetuity and allowing for long-term adaptability for shifting needs and capabilities, and to continue to conduct a transparent, data-driven project selection through our annual budgeting process. Next slide. With these principles, we have reached agreement on programming the Rebuild Illinois funds. The bottom line is that during 2020 to 2024, Rebuild Illinois will generate about $227 million annually for capital improvements in our regional transit system and a total of $2.6 billion over the next 5 years in bonding revenue. As we work towards performance-based programming, the state of good repair backlog percentages determined in the last capital asset condition reports serve as the baseline for the region's state of good repair needs. These were used as a guide for the PAYGO funds for the first 5 years that the funding is received. 62.5% to CTA, 32.5% to Metra, and 5% to PACE. This formula split is intended to only be applicable to the first 5 years that PAYGO funding is received and will not necessarily be indicative of PAYGO allocation over the 5-year period. Next slide, please. For the RTA and the service boards, we have to control what we can. For future funding years, that means our annual budget process will work toward an increasingly collaborative and transparent process for programming the annual PAYGO capital funding. Using the 3 Invest in Transit goals and the 5 newly stated principles, we will seek to deliver projects in a very timely manner, to demonstrate the needs are warranted, and to maximize the transparency and effectiveness of funding allocations. Additionally, the spend down on the funds will be monitored and reported on a quarterly basis, and the rate of spend and unspent dollars will be considered in future budget cycles. We will work collectively with the service boards to define the details of this process, including a timeline and a scope, following this budget cycle. Next slide, please. Wrapping this up, this pie chart shows how the capital funding from all sources is split among the service boards for next year. Next slide, please. And finally, here's the 5-year program funding look by funding source. I'll turn this back over to Doug to close this out.
Next slide, please. Finally, here's a snapshot of the budget calendar through the remainder of the year. The RTA board adopted the budget call in May, setting up the budget development schedule. Today, we are recommending board adoption of the funding allocations as presented. On October 11th, 4 weeks from tomorrow, the service boards submit their proposed operating budgets, 2-year financial plans, and 5-year capital programs to the RTA before entering the public hearing process in October and November. November 15th is a statutorily defined date for the service boards to submit their adopted budgets to the RTA. On November 21st, a special RTA Finance Committee meeting will be held to review the budgets and capital programs of each transit agency. And on December 19th, staff will present the consolidated regional budget for board adoption. The RTA and the service boards have again worked collaboratively through several rounds of negotiations to reach consensus on funding levels that address the needs of the region and the service boards in a fair and equitable manner by the statutorily required deadline. Accordingly, staff is requesting that the Finance Committee recommend board adoption of the funding amounts presented. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. That was a great report. It's such good news, and for those of us who've been around for a while, it's just it's so heartening. And for those of you who knew, you can see the change in the numbers and the results. Congratulations again to Chairman Dillard and Leanne Redden and Jeremy for all getting the message out, and then being fortunate enough to have an administration that realized the message and responded. It's just tremendous. Is there any discussion, any questions, comments? Yes, sir. Director Colson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These marks seem to me to be a pretty reasonable accommodation of the service board needs, with one exception, which I would like to comment on. And that is at page 10 of the materials, which would be paragraph 9 of the ordinance. And I'm concerned about the proposal that amends the longstanding RTA ordinance, which limits to 50% the amount of federal funds the service boards can spend on debt service. And this proposes to raise that limit to 60% for a 5-year period. And I understand all the service boards could do that. I think it's probably not properly part of the marks. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I frankly fail to see the wisdom or the need for that increase from 50% to 60% of federal money. I remember I was around in 2008, and there was a reason we limited debt service to 50% of the federal funds. Times were very difficult then, and I recall we always thought that the number would be going down from 50%, not up from 50%. And all of this, the CTA in this budget wants to utilize this provision to generate $19 million in operating over 5 years, which is, in the ultimate scheme of things, not a lot of money to be doing this. As I understand it, the debt service is now being paid out of operating, and now it would be paid out of federal capital to the tune of $19 million. And that's $19 million, which doesn't go directly to state of good repair. Indirectly it does, but it doesn't directly. And I wonder what the impact is on state of good repair, and I haven't seen any figures on that. I think a better argument could be made for doing this if times were desperate, if there were stopgap need for this. But as you've just reported, operating money for CTA is up 3.7%. Capital for CTA is $291 million the first year, new capital money. So we're really flush, and I don't know that this is the appropriate time to do this, if it were ever wise to do it. It's a lot of machinations in changing the ordinance for just $19 million over 5 years. I think our job is to monitor and restrain debt and not feed debt. And I don't see the wisdom or the need for that particular change. Procedurally, I would suggest that it's not properly part of the marks. The marks are supposed to be the amount of dollars that each service board can budget up to. This is, at a minimum, the provision ought to be a separate proposal to amend an RTA ordinance, which is what it does. And normally that is presented as a separate proposal. So if the board, after discussion, chooses to raise the limit, so be it. But in the meantime, it's sitting in there in the overall proposal, and I find that objectionable. I would suggest, and I would move, Mr. Chairman, that paragraph 9, this provision about the raising the limit from 50% to 60%, be considered as a separate item after the marks themselves are voted on, without paragraph 9. And I would so move.
Accept your move. Your motion, is there a second? There's no second. The motion fails.
Okay. Not the first time that's happened to me, Mr. Chairman.
We appreciate your comments, and there are many of us who care very, very much about debt levels. And Ryan, I'll mention you again today. We've taken these votes over the years, and so we very much appreciate your comments. In this case, it's only 5 years. It's only $19 million, and it is indirectly about state of good repair. But thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate them. Any other comments? Yes, sir. David?
I'm sure we have this in place, but I want to ensure there is oversight and we have accountability of all the service boards to make sure that the funding goes for its intended purposes and not so much operational expenses, especially when there are options such as increasing fares. And I want to make sure that all service boards have a fair and equitable share of diversity and inclusion for all their procurements, especially meeting DBE goals.
Thank you for those comments. Director Holt, and then
I've just got a question for you guys about the assumptions behind the real estate transfer tax and why that's at 3%, particularly given the projections on sales tax and our assumptions about economic growth, and also what we're seeing in the city, in particular with respect to home sales and commercial sales. And I'd like a little bit more background around those assumptions, if you all wouldn't mind, please.
Just at a high level, and we can certainly provide that. We base our projection on the city projection, and actually it's a little bit late. It may or may not be released now, but they were very conservative in their estimate, and we consulted with CTA as well, and we kind of left it flat. But the projection is actually that they expect it to decline somewhat. Now, I projected that years ago in my previous role, and it's never quite been where it was supposed to be. That said, all you need is one big sale, and there it is. It totally changes them. But we'll get you whatever information we have. Thank you.
And the other piece to that as well, that even though these are estimates for a budget, and recall we don't fund to budget as well. So should that shortfall, the service boards all know and understand across with not just isolating the RET, but even on the sales tax piece, that they'll have to make necessary adjustments, and they essentially, even in advance, kind of plan and budget around some of those, not restrictions, but the tentativeness of some of those estimates too.
The other thing, and you probably know this on RET, is that there's also a big timing lag, right? Because of the way the title companies purchase and advance purchase all of the real estate transfer tax old-fashioned stamp system. And then, obviously, there's a big lag, so sometimes it hasn't caught up. Do you think it's too high or too low?
It seems a little aggressive to me, particularly given where we are with real estate sales, and to your point about the lag, where we've had a number of really busy, active years, and I could see a slowdown. You know, I recognize it's an estimate, and of course, the you know, service boards and CTA in particular is going to have to work around that. I just wanted to understand the thinking, and I'm happy to take it offline and talk to you about it in more detail if that would. Thank you.
Okay.
Director Sager.
Yeah, first, I want to thank staff both for the summary report and the significant effort that has brought us to today's discussion. So thank you very much. You have my commendation. Second, as Director Holt, I also understand that the discussions of funding allocations have utilized certain underlying assumptions, not the least of which are ridership goals and certainly also sales tax projections and Rebuild Illinois funds. We have a staff and we have, as a board, had a great deal of appreciation for fiscal conservatism in terms of approaching our budgeting. I think that's most responsible, and I appreciate that very much. However, we also have to acknowledge that each month, each year-to-date report we get, you know, we are reporting out that due to ridership declines or due to underperforming sales tax revenues, this is where we find ourselves. And so while I appreciate the conservatism that has been taken in terms of putting this projection together, I guess I just want to feel assured that we do believe that it is reasonable in the context of those types of monthly reports that we are receiving. First question.
So on the ridership question, you know, we work very closely with the service boards. And they will be, as you know, coming in November to speak a little bit more about their budgets, and certainly ridership is always a topic that gets addressed. We don't set their ridership projections, obviously they do, and we monitor. And I do think they've been much more realistic. I mean, they used to project flat. Many of them project, especially when fares went up, they did project some declines and so forth. So we work with them on that. The public funding, I think we've been much more realistic. You know, we are putting it in at 17.5. The reduced fare reimbursement, where we had been carrying it at 34, because it's been obviously several years, and this time we actually have a budget. We've assumed, you know, the 1.5 sales charge to continue. We've assumed that the 0.5 PTF, 5% PTF reduction, that will continue. So we've included all of that, but they are estimates, and you know, as Leanne pointed out, there is no longer a fund to budget guarantee, so they all know that they have to adjust accordingly, and they've demonstrated that through their monthly actuals, as you know, even just a few moments ago when we reported, we're meeting the recovery ratio goals, and they adjust their expenses accordingly when the funding is coming in more challenging. So that's all I can say about that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Third, regarding the proposed funding amounts, levels to the various service boards, I've had the unique opportunity, I guess, or the great challenge to serve on a number of labor negotiation boards on both sides of the table. I know that it's a challenge, and while this is not labor negotiations per se, I know that there was a significant amount of negotiation derived as a result of the discussions with the various service boards, and I'm tremendously grateful. In any type of negotiation, you ultimately hope that the parties walk away frankly, not feeling that they got everything that they asked for, although in this case, I think they got significantly the majority, if not a little bit more than what was requested, but also that you walk away feeling that it's something that we can live with. And so I'm extremely pleased. I know that there was some give and take with regards to Metra and CTA in here. What is proposed before us, I think, is a most appropriate accommodation. And coming from a suburban county representing a district that relies greatly on Metra, I have no qualms with regards to the agreement that was derived. And so with regards to that, it's my full intent to support the proposal that is before us, even with the language changes as we have just recently received, and I do so with a tremendous amount of appreciation, respect, and commendation to Leanne and the other staff for a job well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Sager, for those comments. Yes, Director Lewis.
This is more in the form of a question. This year, and I think that I support the comments that have been made about the process, We are blessed with the happy situation where we finally got a budget approved and we had money really to kind of work through this process with. Occurring with some regularity because with the change of administration, that certainly has been a major step forward. So I just, in a macro sense, wondered, how that sits.
I'd love the crystal ball. I probably wouldn't be sitting here if I had that crystal ball and could absolutely predict that, because I'd be looking at tomorrow's lottery and just be off into the sunset. But in all seriousness, I mean, I think our collective, and this is a conversation we've had at length with the 3 other EDs, and I think I said this at last month's board meeting, our intention here is to play the long game, recognizing that while this is an important and an unprecedented amount of money coming our way from the state legislature, that we continue to spend down on those dollars quickly, efficiently, and deliver projects, justifying the need, showing that we can allocate those dollars and use them efficiently, but with an eye on, especially on the bond piece, because that has a 5-year window, that we're, around year 3 looking forward to what comes after that and building the additional case or the ongoing case with our legislature to highlight the need for that continued stability on the bond piece. The pay-as-you-go, as it stands right now, it keeps coming to us in perpetuity. So that gives us, for the first time ever, a slice of money that is sort of more predictable and more stable, at least for the foreseeable future. So, we've got a little bit of additional certainty that we didn't have in the past, but again, in the bond case, we're looking to build a case to justify them coming back in and creating another bond package, because we can't go through these sort of droughts and famines, whatever sort of phrase you want to use, because as that slide with the graphic slide that Jill just showed, if we just do this package as a one and done, even though as substantial as it is, it would be over time a blip on the radar, and we just get back to where we are kind of now, in a very short period beyond that. So it is the intention of, this is unprecedented, this is good, let's deliver on this, and let's build towards what's coming next to get to that stable point.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Okay. If there are no more, is there a motion and a second to approve this item? May I have a motion, please? Director Lewis, Director Holtz, second. May we have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Director Colson? Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt? Director Cotel? Director Lewis?
Aye.
Dr. Sager?
Yes.
Director Troiani? Director Melvin?
Yes.
7 ayes, 1 nay, and 1 absent.
The motion carries. All right. Is there any other business to come before the committee today? It's been a full morning here. It's been great. Congratulations on this, guys. It's a tremendous, tremendous achievement.
Chairman, excuse me, for a point of clarification,
Yes.
I just want to make sure that what we just passed was with the scripted amendments that have been presented before us. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was just the language tweaks to the
Correct.
memo,
Yes.
nothing else on any schedules or anything.
That was,
Yes.
that was all
That
of
is
our
correct.
intent. So I
Yes.
just want to make sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for checking. Appreciate it. If there's no further business to come before the public session of the Finance Committee, I will entertain a motion and second to adjourn. Director Trioni, Director Lewis seconds. May I have leave? Leave. Thank you. We stand adjourned.
Good morning, everyone. I call the monthly meeting of the Regional Transportation Authority full board to order, and with that, let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, as we always do.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It was I went to my sophomore high school daughter's parent-teacher night